Hi, you're listening to Boggy Talk, Faith Conversations in the Mud, a resource of Church on Bayshore. Boggy Talk is recorded on Boggy Bayou in Niceville, Florida, and is hosted by Justin Wyatt and James Ross, pastors at Church on Bayshore. We typically want every matter of faith and life to have crystal clear answers, but it isn't always that easy. This podcast digs in to help Christians think with a kingdom mentality about topics that sometimes get muddy and bog us down. So let's dive in.
Hey, welcome to Boggy Talk. Thanks for tuning in to week 2 of our series, Diving Deep. Before we dive deep in the boggy mud, I'm going to say hey to James Ross, lead pastor at Church on Bayshore. How you doing, buddy?
I'm great, Justin.
Happy Mother's Day week.
Thank you. That's a pretty shirt.
You know, thanks. It's flower. That is the only shirt that I have that has like a floral print. And
Really?
I feel, yeah, it is. And I kind of like it. I wore it on Easter.
It could be my grandmother's tablecloth, or it could be a good-looking shirt.
Yeah, so it's, you know, I'm trying to
sure
rock
my
it.
grandmother has, it's like a plastic material tablecloth. Like
Yeah.
over her.
Oh, yeah. Man, I remember growing up, my grandma had like the plastic things on the carpet, like to protect the carpet. But I'm like, and they were hard.
The clear thing?
Yeah.
The other side of them will like stab you.
Yeah. Do they make those anymore? I wonder. I haven't seen those in a long time.
I think in our offices, we, have
we
them
probably do
underneath
have them in our
chairs.
offices.
Yeah.
Man.
That's funny.
Man,
I saw somebody the other day, they had tied like grocery bags around their headrest in their car.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. I don't know who it
because
was.
I've seen it in the parking lot.
Yeah.
We won't say their names though. I can guarantee you they do not listen to Boggy Talk because they do not have the technology.
I've narrowed it down. I've narrowed it down because everyone listens to Boggy Talk.
Everyone. So, did you guys have a great Mother's Day celebration?
We
you celebrate
did.
your wonderful wife.
Christy
your
is
mom.
awesome.
Yeah.
Christy is awesome. And your Christy is awesome as
she
well.
She is. You know, this year, so last year Mother's Day, our kids blew it. Like but before Mother's Day, I was like, hey, Mother's Day's coming up. And they just absolutely forgot. And then like that weekend, it goes, that Sunday's crazy. You know, Sundays are crazy. So we try to, anytime it's a holiday Sunday, we're going to celebrate it on Saturday. And they were terrible like last year. And so like afterward, I basically I sat them down and was like, you know, I just laid it. I was like, yeah, how could you do this to your mother? And then the next weekend they made up for it. So this year we were proactive again. And I reminded them of last year, and I will say they came through very nicely. So.
But then they were like, but she's not going to be our mom in heaven. Like they said that
right.
this Sunday. So they were like, why did we do all this?
Yeah, great transition. Great transition. So, hey, we are in this series talking through passages that we're talking about.
I shouldn't have referred to her as your Christy because of the sermon.
That's right. Yeah. No one's mine. That's right.
That's
No one is mine. No one completes me. Jesus completes me. That's the end of the podcast because that's the point.
That's it. We're done.
So we are taking a deeper dive into the passage that we're looking into Sunday because we really want our heart in our worship services as we plan worship, as we're going through books of the Bible and expository preaching, is to help people study the Bible on their own and dig deeper. I heard this at some point, basically like we live in a time where we have more Bible resources available to us for free than any generation in the history of since the Bible's written. Yet we're probably one of the most biblically illiterate generation, even in the church, because, you know, the availability of resources doesn't necessarily mean
we have all this, and we'd rather read Chicken Soup for the Christian Soul and the Jesus Calling Bible.
Yeah, so many other things that we'd rather just fill our minds with. So our heart in this is to really help people.
God just hasn't spoke to me enough.
I know. I'm like, dude, just read, and He will speak. It's alive. It's alive. So this past Sunday on Mother's Day, we were in Mark chapter 12, verses 18 through 27. So I'm going to take a moment to read those to give us context for those who have not had a chance to listen to this previous week's teaching.
If somebody fast forwards to this, do you think they're going to hell?
I think there's sufficient grace.
Okay, all right.
It would be clearly because they haven't memorized.
Oh, okay.
So you can skip forward 30 seconds, 40, probably a minute. It's a longer passage if you've already read this or you know it by heart. Here we go. Mark chapter 12, 18 through 27 says this. And Sadducees came to him, who say that there is no resurrection. And they asked him a question saying, Teacher,
Moses, should we do a dialogue? I'm just kidding.
Right,
Okay.
that'd be funny.
Okay, go for it.
Teacher Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife, but leaves no children, the man must take the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. There were 7 brothers. The first took a wife, and when he died, left no offspring. The second took her and died, leaving no offspring. And the third likewise. And the 7 left no offspring. Last of all, the woman also died. In the resurrection, when they rise again, whose wife will she be? For the 7 had her as wife. Jesus said to them, Is this not the reason you are wrong? Because you know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God. For when they rise from the dead, they will neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the dead being raised, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the passage about the bush, how God spoke to him, saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not God of the dead, but of the living. You are quite wrong.
Dude, I'm going to start saying you are quite wrong.
I think that needs to be like, we just need to have that scripture quote up. Like, people put scripture art on the wall. We just put, you are quite wrong.
That's good.
Mark 12:27.
That's good. You are quite wrong. Yeah, that's a good one.
In this passage.
That's a good shirt
It
idea.
is. You are quite wrong. Jesus.
Yeah.
So in this passage, they're trying again to trick Jesus, to catch him and to trip him up. And basically Jesus, again, because he's just so good, so smart, so wise, but also compassionate and caring and corrective, says, you're wrong. You're actually, and isn't it even
you're quite wrong.
You're quite wrong. And at first glance, isn't it funny that they're trying to trick Jesus with this scenario that's just like, oh my. So let's just say if, and then all these, it's really hypothetical.
You have to hear like a middle school kid's voice too, like, well, okay, so.
But what if?
Yeah, what if?
That's essentially what it comes
Yeah.
across as. So what's going on in this passage, Pastor Ross?
Well, yeah, so the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection.
Yes.
So they're really challenging the traditional view of the resurrection. And so they know Jesus has kind of got this ministry where he's setting himself apart, and he's just set apart. So that's why he's setting himself apart wholly. And so they're like, okay, well, what about the resurrection? And they're like, this is why the resurrection doesn't make sense. And he's like, your whole question doesn't make sense if you understand who God is. And they only accept the Torah. This is what's so awesome about Jesus. And he shows them in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible,
right,
how they're missing. God is the God of the living.
Yes.
And so they're thinking about heaven from an earthly perspective, or resurrection from an earthly perspective, instead of thinking about it from a heavenly perspective.
And we never do that. We never think about heaven from an earthly perspective. So this past Sunday, you shared a diagram, like a Revelation reason diagram. That was really helpful for kind of understanding this and how we're so limited. Why don't you explain that a little bit more? Yeah,
I should give you the background of that diagram. You know where I first, who used that diagram in one of their curriculum?
I don't know.
Mars Hill Church in
Seattle.
I know, right?
Rise
Do you
and
feel
fall.
like
Now it feels a little dirty. Like we need to put an asterisk.
You're surprised that there's an image of a man on the diagram. You're surprised it wasn't anatomically correct since it's Mars Hill Church.
Hill. You're like, oh, it's a man. This is a man diagram.
Right. Anyway,
Who are you?
We could go all kind of places there. But yeah, I showed, if you weren't with us on Sunday, may God forgive you. No, I'm just kidding.
The Lord have mercy on your soul.
Yeah. If you weren't with us, then I showed this image of it's a man, and then there's this, he's reasoning, and there's arrows going up to his reason, but then there's like a ceiling, and he can only reason to a certain perspective. Mm-hmm. And revelation, that's God revealing himself, revealing things to us, comes down beyond our reason. Mm-hmm. The Sadducees were people who really only dealt with like what made natural sense to them. Mm-hmm. And so they really struggle with the idea of God speaking to us and changing our reasoning. And so that's why I shared that, is because like we, operate with an understanding of the world, and God reveals things to us. So like creation reveals things to us, but then God's specific revelation of his word clarifies things for us even more. Like the natural man's way of viewing certain things changes by what God speaks to us. Does that make sense?
It does
I
make
keep
sense.
asking that during this podcast.
Does it make sense? Because it's a lot to comprehend.
Or is that too boggy?
Like basically, God's revelation supersedes our reason, and really the only way we can understand things is if He helps us understand them.
Yeah,
So, and really that comes through illumination of by the Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit's work in us. So,
which is opposite of the Sadducees, and also opposite of kind of the modern view where reason, like truth, comes from within.
Yeah.
We talked about that on our Disney podcast. You can go back and listen to that, When Dreams Come True. But like we've kind of started saying that what we feel inside is the ultimate authority, instead of like what's coming from outside. And what's crazy is we've gotten to the point where even like that defies biology and science. So certainly if it defies like biology and science, then we're going to defy what we're hearing from God and His word based on just what we naturally feel.
Yeah, and I think that
we're in trouble.
It's kind of like we basically have our own bias, because I think a lot of people will struggle with like we want everything about God to make logical sense.
Right.
Well, whose logic?
And not just, exactly.
Whose logic? Our logic, our view of what logic should be. And really God is without you can reason, like Tim Keller's book, The Reason for God. Like he lays out like how it is reasonable to believe in God. It's not an unreasonable thing. Yeah. At the same time, God is beyond reason because we cannot understand everything about Him. And ultimately that's a good thing.
I think the reason we don't like this is because it confronts us with this reality that every single person who ever walks the face of the earth is a person of faith. We just we exist for such a small period of time and such a small portion of the world to know all of the truth in our natural reasoning. And so we have to rely on outside information to inform us. And the Christian is saying, I believe that God is the one who's speaking, this is the key to heaven and this is the way to life, where there's other people that are there's other people that are saying this is how we should live. But all of it, and that's Keller's getting into, all of us are operating with some degree of faith, and we're just contending that the Bible is God's revelation to us on how to live. And so are we going to trust in God and how we should live? Or are we going to trust in Freud? I mean, I'm not, or whatever. That was easy, but maybe.
Yeah. Well, and so in this passage,
you are quite wrong, Freud.
You are quite wrong. So in this passage, Jesus is using one of their deductions of reason against them, really, to teach them. And it has to do with resurrection. As you said, they denied the resurrection. And so Jesus gives them right teaching about the resurrection, but really getting to a bigger issue, because He's not just correcting them about resurrection. He's correcting the way they're thinking. Right,
about God. Yeah. So C.S. Lewis said, I believe in Christianity as I believe in that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. And really that is a great... That's a great, kind of summary of the Christian life lived out. Like once you have the sun, you begin to see everything else. And once you have the S-O-N, then you begin to see everything else as well. And we test those things, right? Hey, is this true? But I would say one of the great evidences of the Bible being true is history. It has proven to be true. The things of God not only are claimed to be true, but they hold up as true. So they're dealing with like a very small view of God instead of a living God, God who's not bound by time. They're thinking of things in this linear process,
Right.
And so that really gets into, I think, how we tend to view our life and how we tend to think about heaven. And it really confronts that, because specifically in a Western culture, and specifically, with family values, we often think of heaven as this picture of something. And I think that then affects like how we view life and affects how church looks often to an unhealthy level.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about that. But first, you asked this question last week, and Jesus addresses this specifically in this passage. Will your spouse be in heaven?
Ooh. I mean, if they believe in Jesus, they will be.
Yeah. Yes. But will they be your spouse in heaven?
It doesn't seem to be the case based on this text.
Does not seem to be the case based on this text. Yes, I agree. So again, heaven is far beyond what we comprehend. But based on this text, it certainly seems like we're not given to marriage in heaven, because like the ultimate reality of heaven, the ultimate reality of marriage on this side of eternity is to be a picture of Christ and the church and their relationship. And that picture is fully consummated in heaven. Like it is fully there in reality and in perfect union with him.
Yeah. C.S. Lewis also in The Great Divorce writes about like this idea that, if we were to enter into heaven right now with our as the natural man, we actually would not like heaven because it would be a lot of things that we don't naturally desire. But yet what Christ is doing in us is he's transforming us, he's glorifying us, he's sanctifying us. And so by the time we get to heaven, like that process will be complete. So we will desire the right things of God. And so I think, for a lot of people, when you think about like what we understand about heaven is it's focused on Jesus. There's no class. There's no reward for our earning. Like, there's no probably children, like we don't have children. We don't have parents. We don't have spouses. Like that's what the Bible seems to point to. And it's just.
That's really hard for us to imagine.
I think. It's hard for us to imagine that being good.
Yeah, because that's ultimate now. Like your family is more important. And it's hard for us to imagine that being a greater, better reality.
But like, think about it. Like if that were heaven, there's a lot of people who don't fit that. Like they don't have believing spouses. Like they're single all their life. They don't have children. Like how is it heaven for them?
If that's what heaven is. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Are my children? Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. And that's what Jesus is saying. He's like, you're asking this question about the resurrection from like a earthly view. You're not asking like about heaven and it's too big. It is too big. I mean, God is saying, I am the God of Jacob. I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac. So like, I'm the God of all of them right now. When he wrote that in the time of Moses, who were all dead. Like, not I was the God. Like, I am the God.
I am. Yeah.
They're alive.
Same God. Yeah. As you're saying that too, like I've heard it, like shared this way. And I think it's, I don't mean this in any insensitivity to anyone who, has done this or received it this way, but it's kind of like when people like have experienced loss and they're not a Christian and maybe the person who died was, and they're like, well, don't you want to see them again?
Yeah.
Here's how you can see them again. And so I understand the heart behind that, but it's also like a little manipulative, and so like,
I will say I hate that.
Yeah.
You said it much nicer. I am going to tell those people you are quite wrong when they say that.
Because it's a manipulative way of like, like we don't know how that's going to be in heaven. Like we just know there will be great rejoicing and we will be this family of faith worshiping Jesus, experiencing him for all of eternity. Like we don't, and it's just a manipulative way to.
And like, it is hard to fathom. And here's what I would just say, like, if that brings a degree of sadness, like, I do understand that. But for every ounce of sadness that makes you feel, what Christ is going to be and do in you for all of eternity is worth a weight that we can't even measure.
Yes.
And so that's what I think, like when I talk to our young kids about heaven, whether it's the kids here at the church that I teach or got my Bay Short Kids shirt on representing, that wasn't planned, but, or my own children, like when they talk about what would the perfect heaven be, which is always like roller coasters and donuts, and all that.
Eat ice cream.
Yeah. I'm like, you know what? All I know is it's going to be a gazillion times better than
Way
that.
better. Yes.
Christ and the fullness of his glory is going to be there. I will say that, this is something to really ask ourselves though, like, is Jesus Lord and is he our treasure? Because like, if we don't want a heaven that doesn't have those things, then like, are we really worshiping him or are we just seeing him as a means to those things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I remember in high school, there were some guys on the bus and they were making fun of our bus driver because she was a Christian who like just sang praise songs all the time. And they were like, basically like, you're so lame. And they were like, she just wants to like go to heaven. And they were like, I remember they said like, I don't even want to go to heaven because I don't want to like sit on a cloud and play a harp all day. And that's kind of like, a lot of people how they view. And
Which, if you have 6 kids, it sounds really relaxing.
You're like, well, that actually does sound like heaven, just floating on a cloud and no one bothering me. It's so true. But it's like, I told him, like, that's not what heaven is. And I didn't really understand what heaven was then. I still
You're like, heaven's ice cream. What are you talking
that's
about?
right. And we just get to have fun. But it's like, but I think that is people's view. And you know, one of the things that he says in this verse, he's like, we will be like the angels. And so that has led, that verse and that mentality does lead to some misconception, because I remember when Christy and I were married, first married, and she was a social worker, and she had a family that she was very close to that was doing foster care, and one of the children they had adopted had medical needs and then died, sadly. And we were at the funeral, and it was a sweet funeral of a child who was born with just severe disadvantages, physically, mentally. But, you know, we believe, like, through God's redemption through this family and through, you know, what they can understand the gospel would be in heaven. And the mom was an older lady, and she was up talking, and she was like, you know, I just know that heaven's gained an angel, and she's up there. Was like, I leaned over, Christina's like, somebody needs to tell her, like, we don't become angels. Now, that's not the right time to do.
Yeah, right.
But I think some people that's what they think. Like, all of a sudden that's not what Jesus isn't saying. We become like angels and that we get wings and we fly around. What he's talking about is that he's talking specifically about marriage, like the union.
Yeah.
Like, angels aren't given to marriage, and in heaven neither will we be.
Yeah. You know, this is a good, again, I think each person has to evaluate their own heart, because like one person like is saying this is the condition in which I think it's heaven, and the other person is just sad and they're expressing as best they can, you know, what's going to happen, and God in his grace, I mean, just like, it's going to be immeasurably better. And we know that because God came to the earth and suffered for us and was victorious over death. Like, so we know that. But so when you read this verse and you're like, oh, I'm not going to be married in heaven, did you start saying to Christy, well, girl, you're my angel, you're my darling, Shaggy?
Baby. Yeah, just call me angel.
I think that, you know, it's just, you don't want to be mean-spirited about this, but like, really, is Jesus the treasure? You know, I think that's the question.
That's exactly what it comes down to. I think, you know, whatever we can imagine, we can talk about all the things that we've heard or we've thought, or, you know, you hear people say, I mean, we unfortunately we go to a lot of funerals, and some of the things that get shared, you're like, no, like, that's not, you know, like, he's just up there just fishing, and like, or she's, you know, it's like, well, maybe. I mean, I just know whatever it is, it's going to be awesome. So maybe they are. Maybe there is fishing in heaven. We honestly don't really know. And if we do, it'll be amazing, and we'll catch something, and it'll be beautiful, and will be so much joy, and it'll be perfect. But, you know, like Jesus says, behold, I'm coming to make all things new. And that's the hope, is like that he's making all things new in this picture of heaven. You know, when God created everything before the fall, like everything he created we were in perfect union. Like, Adam was like this perfect union with Lord until the fall. And because of the fall, all of creation was affected. And so Christ is coming back, and he is coming to make all things new. And I think some of our view of heaven is this place we get to escape to. And I think historically you can look at this with the church. You know, if you go back 100 years and look at hymns, a lot of the talk about going to heaven is like leaving earth to go to heaven. Like, and now, like, because life was a lot harder then, you know, you think about the Great Depression and the war, you know, like, and so people was like, yes, I can't wait to leave earth to get to heaven. And it was almost this escapist. But really, you know, what we see is like Jesus is coming to make with the new heavens and new earth, like he is going to make everything right as it was before. And so he is coming to essentially like bring the new heavens and the new earth, all things will be made right how it was. And so we need to view, I think, heaven not as this place to escape to, but as this reality that, you know, like we are called now to bring heaven to earth. Like,
so are you singing heaven is a place on earth?
Oh, heaven is a place on earth.
I'm just going to keep teeing you up for these songs.
All these songs. But I think like that's our hope. That's our reality. You know, this, if you go and read Revelation chapter 21, this picture of the new heavens and new earth where there'll be no more mourning, no more. He'll wipe away every tear. There'll be no need of the sun because Jesus himself will be the sun. Like,
I'll take that.
That's our hope.
I love Christy, but I'll take that.
That is going to be amazing. And like, you know, will you, I mean, I have no idea. We
Yeah.
don't know anything
Yeah.
about heaven apart from what scriptures tell us. There's
Yeah.
no one who's been there and come back that has a real story. That's another podcast we could talk about. But it's like, we don't fully know what it's going to be like. But we just know it's going to be amazing because Jesus is going to be there, and there will be no need for the sun because he will light it up, and all things will be made right. And because of that, like, we can endure now. So God's word to us is endure. Paul's letters he's writing to the church, endure, because we have this hope. We have the resurrection. Paul says that if we don't have the resurrection, we're to be pitied. We have that. Death has been swallowed up to death. Death has been crushed to death. That's hope. And that's beyond that, like, what do we know? I don't know.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was just thinking about, I think something I said last week was that, we need a theology of suffering, and in the West, we don't have a good one. And I think every child and teenager can't imagine a heaven where there's not like fun, where there's not roller coasters and sports and big yard.
Oh yeah. In my father's house, we can play football.
Yeah.
That's
and
right.
then in your 20s and 30s, like every dude can't imagine a heaven where you can't have sex. You know what I mean?
People are like, because this is the best thing the world has to offer.
Right. And then in your 40s and 50s, I think like it's hard to imagine a heaven without family, and all of that. And then as you get older, it's hard to imagine, maybe the same things. I don't know. I'm not there yet. I'm not in my 40s like you, Justin. But the reality is, I think when we suffer and we lose some of these things, or we don't have some of these things, and Christ is enough in those moments on earth, it really is this taste of heaven, and that's why we can learn so much from those who suffer. And as I was thinking about this, a song I love that is Southern Gospel that you should do in the first service sometime is that song where it's like, I see Abraham and Isaac and Jacob.
Yeah, bowed on my knees and cried holy.
And then he's like, I just want to see Jesus. Yeah. And it's like, we might see these people in heaven. Yeah. But dude, I just want to see Jesus. Yeah. And like, if that's not your mentality, then I don't know that you know who Jesus is. Like, I don't know that you know who Jesus is. And kind of changing gears or shifting gears as we start wrapping this thing up is, so we're talking a lot about like heaven and what it's going to be. But as you were saying, like Jesus came and heaven is now, like this begins now. So, it's not just like eat, drink, be merry, die, and then Jesus. Like,
live it up,
like the seed of the gospel of the kingdom of God is being planted in our hearts. And so we start to view the world more like this as we go. And I think God puts things like suffering to accelerate that in our lives. That's why it's considered pure joy when you face trials of many kinds, because the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Like that's really saying like it's creating a faith in you that causes you to endure in faithfulness. So I think like God is the God of the living, right? So like the Spirit is alive, and I talk about this Sunday, the Spirit is alive in us working now. Faith is not just believing God does powerful things, it's his power at work in our life right now.
Yes. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, how are we living in light of heaven now? Like how, this should change. Jesus changes everything. Like this should change how we live now. Like the fact that heaven is our home, that should change how we live now. It should change what we're willing to do. It should change our priorities. If we know we have eternal rest, eternal security in him, eternity with Jesus, like it changes how we can endure. Like I know I can endure anything because Jesus is with me now and will be with me, and I will be with him, actually is a better way to say it, forever.
It's interesting because you think about it and you're like, okay, so Jesus is this treasure, and everything else that I hold dear to in this earth probably won't be with me in heaven the way that I view it. And you think, oh, well, that brings less value to all these things. But actually, if remember back to the revelation reason thing, like that's how we reason, right? But when we place Christ as the ultimate treasure, it's like we find our identity less in those things, like being a husband, being a wife, being a father, being a child, all these things. But we actually find them to be more meaningful.
Yeah.
In their proper place underneath
that's good.
Submission to Christ.
So resurrection brings more value to those things. Yeah, yes. I see what you're saying. And that's a great point. I had not really thought of it that way. So, wow, look at me learning something.
Oh, man.
Way to go.
So happy to teach you.
I love seeing things in a new way. It's
In
like,
2 years of
right.
Boggy Talk, you finally learned one thing from me.
But that's so true. It puts things in their right place and right perspective, adds value, because then you see them in light. You see them in light of who Jesus is and his hope and his promises, and that changes everything.
That changes everything.
Jesus changes everything.
There's so much we could say, but do we really need to say anything else?
Man, so just know this. Heaven's going to be so much better than you can possibly. It's going to just be amazing. I mean, amazing is such a shallow word compared to what it's actually going to be like. And that changes how we live. So how is it changing you? And how are you living in light of heaven as reality and living in light of, let your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven? How are we seeking to bring heaven to earth?
And that's a good segue to next week as we look at Matthew, or Mark, 12.
Continue to Mark chapter 12.
38 to 34.
Yeah, I'm talking about loving God, loving people, and what that really looks like. Because people aren't always easy to love, but we're called to love them. So we're going to talk about that next week on Boggy Talk.
And you aren't always easy to love.
Yeah, yes, very true.
But we love you,
That's
our
right.
listening and viewing audience.
That's right. Well, hey, thanks for listening. We love you, even if you don't love us. But we know you do. So, all right. Thanks for tuning in. We'll tune in next time.
That's all, folks.
Thanks for listening to Boggy Talk. We are so glad you joined in the conversation. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss a beat.